Okay, I think I got it.
Ladies and gentlemen, could we get this meeting of the Kansas Prohibition Party started? And I just want to say, what do you all think of free beer? Right. John McDonald has promised free beer at the Kansas City Public Library every night from now on. Thank you, John. It is my job to introduce John McDonald, who's probably the one Kansas City entrepreneur who needs no introduction, certainly to this crowd from the look of you. But I want to take 1 second to mention a couple of upcoming programs. We thought about doing the program I'm going to mention together tonight with our program with Boulevard and John McDonald and Payton Kelly. Gail we're doing an ongoing series on entrepreneurs, and John was actually one of the first. I interviewed John about how he made Boulevard into such a success, and we've extended that series, had a lot of great people. Gail Lozoff of Spin Pizza, Henry Block's done it, a lot of great people. We're sort of concentrating on women this year, working with the Central Exchange, and we have next Tuesday night, we have Gail of Gail's Harley Davidson coming. And so, please come. She's got a great story, and but we decided not to do it tonight along with Boulevard. We didn't want to drink and drive. Sorry, I worked out. That took a long time to work up to that joke, you know. But one other thing I do want to mention, we have another ongoing series that we have with David Von Dreely. David is the national roving editor for Time Magazine. He's written most of the cover stories for Time Magazine in the last couple of years, including President Obama, Man of the Year, Chief Justice Roberts, and Ascending. This is in ascending order, Glenn Beck. How much have you been drinking? But David is one of the leading journalists in Washington, but now lives in Kansas City. And he got a big family, couldn't afford to live in Washington anymore. But he's now bringing leading journalists to Kansas City and interviewing them at the Central Library. and Gail will be at the Central Library as well, by the way, next Tuesday. But a week from Tuesday, he'll be interviewing Joel Achenbach, who's one of the Washington Post's leading reporters and columnists, and who is, among other things, their space exploration columnist. And they'll be talking about the future of space exploration, the future of NASA, et cetera. And that should be really interesting. We've got a lot of other really interesting things. I suspect that there's some people who are not normal public library participants here tonight. Please sign up and get on our mailing list, because we actually have something for everybody. We have something for everybody almost every night at the library, a lot going on, and we'd love to have you be a part of it. But now it is my honor to introduce my friend. He was also my customer when I was a banker. The largest loan that I ever made was to John, and as I explained it to my father, I only lent money on liquid collateral, and he was happy with that, and with the case of Pale Ale that I gave him. John is an amazing success story, and he's one of craft beer has of course become a big deal in the United States, and it's everywhere in every state, every location. But Boulevard is one of its greatest success stories. John McDonald, one of its greatest success stories. I explain it this way. I once went with Tom Eagleton, who was then Senator Eagleton, who was then the chairman of the board of the Truman Library, to Budweiser to Anheuser-Busch to raise some money to restore the library. And we were ushered into August Bush's conference room where they were tasting the hops for the month. And August Bush didn't invite us to sit down, but he did invite us to taste the hops. They had about 12 cups from various states, various hop fields around the country lined up. And so Tom Eagleton and I tasted the hops. And I said, well, I think this one is the best. And Tom said, well, I'll go along with that. And so August Bush said, well, that's what it'll be then. That's August 1999 Budweiser. And Tom Eagleton and I left the conference room a little while later, and I turned to him and I said, I couldn't taste the difference. And Tom said, neither could I. And I said, and that's August 1999. And of course, the great story of John McDonald is he can taste, so we can taste the difference. And he is now, of course, in 1999, I went into the office of the largest Missouri-owned brewery, and now I'm going to introduce the guy who runs the largest Missouri-owned brewery, and it's all about the taste. And, right. John is a Kansas farm boy made good. He started small in a shot glass. He's worked his way up to a yard of ale. Sorry, that's also a really bad joke, and I'm sorry. I apologize. I've been drinking. It's true. It's true. I really don't actually need to tell you a lot more, except that John McDonald's one of the greatest success stories from a business point of view in Kansas City. He's one of the greatest success stories from an aesthetic point of view, and hiring Payton Kelly to do those beer label designs, which you'll find out more about in a minute, is a part of that. And of course, he's given an enormous amount back to the community. You all see the Ripple glass recycling, but he does a lot. We partner every year with Literacy Kansas City on the spelling bee, and John is a big sponsor, and Boulevard is a big sponsor of that. But you'll see Boulevard signs at most charitable events in this city. And so, ladies and gentlemen, John McDonald.
Well, I don't know, I was invited to this tonight, but I didn't know I was going to actually introduce Payton until just now, so, but that's good because I never know what I'm going to say anyway before I stand in front of a crowd. Payton and I go way back, actually. My wife, Ann, and Payton worked at Hallmark together, and we got invited years ago over to Payton and Becky's house, and he had made some home brew. And I had made home brew when I was a kid, but I hadn't really done it, as an adult at that time. And this was probably in the early 80s, I would say. And he had made some beer, and I thought, wow, this is really good. And it's what kind of got me started home brewing. And Payton and I actually homebrewed together for a year or so, made, I don't know, 4 or 5 batches. It was mostly drinking beer and making beer, but the beer we made wasn't really very good, but if I remember right. But we had a really good time doing it. And then, when I started the brewery, I had a very limited budget for developing the branding and the label design. It was a very tough birth just getting our diamond logo brand that we started out with. And because we were, of course, only draft beer in the first year, we didn't really need a bottle label. And Payton didn't actually do the original diamond logo. But I went through my whole budget just getting that done. And the money that I spent really was, I kind of learned the hard way how real business works. I hired a firm to help me with the original design, and they showed me a bunch of stuff I didn't like and said, that'll be $15,000. And so I sort of was like, okay, now I have to get this done with no money. And, we did it on the, yeah. And so Payton actually started helping us as a freelancer. And then after a few years, I had gone to art school, but, I didn't feel comfortable making our own labels. And so I hired Payton as a full-time artist at the brewery, which I think is really unique. I don't know of another brewery really in the country that makes their own labels. I mean, usually you would hire an agency to do that. And but I've always believed that, the labels and the branding should be very reflective of the brewery. So, Payton's been, I don't know, working for us full-time, I think, since probably 95, but freelance for us for some years before that, and really did all of our early label design. So he started from the very beginning with that. And I really got the idea from Guinness. Guinness actually was a brewery that, I don't know if you've seen a lot of their stuff they did back in the 50s with like the birds and the parrots. And I always thought it was a neat idea that you have your own artists that makes your own branding. And so anyway, Payton has done all of this work for us. And really, it's really nice because I'll tell you, Payton, and I'm sure he hates it, but, he takes criticism pretty well. It's like everybody in the brewery walks into his office and goes, I don't like that, or I like that, or I don't like that. So now he's got like 130 people all telling him what they think, and he still listens to them. And really, at the end of the day, we trust him implicitly to come up with the best possible thing. So anyway, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Payton Kelly. Are these your glasses? Those are those.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, John. What a wonderful introduction that was. Actually, I don't listen to any of those other people. I only listen to you. Believe me. No, thank you. That was a very wonderful introduction, and I very much appreciate it. I hope the talk will live up to the intro. I want to start by thanking the Kansas City Public Library for this opportunity. This is a real thrill and an honor to be asked to talk here today like this. I also want to thank everybody who's here today for coming out for the talk. This is really an amazing crowd to draw for this subject, and it's unbelievably gratifying. I also want to apologize for those of you who have to sit so far in the back. I know that the public library staff is working very hard to make sure that you can see and hear everything very well, and that it all works out. I hope to take a little time today, not feeding back, and sort of give you a little background on our labels, tell you some of the history, and tell you a few of the stories that are behind some of the labels that we've developed, as well as kind of shifting gears in the middle of it and walking you through sort of how it is that we do go through the process of branding a beer. And I do hope to keep my remarks fairly brief for a couple of reasons. First of all, I do want to set aside some good time for questions at the end, which I think are often some of the most important parts of a presentation like this. And the second reason, of course, is because I know we've all been drinking beer, and we're going to need to get to the restrooms before too long. So without further ado, let's get started. As I was beginning to prepare for this presentation, I asked my wife for some advice about how I should plan it. And she said, well, you know, show some of your early work because it will provide some background for people. And I thought, well, that's a good idea. So I thought, well, let's do exactly that. That's my mom's handwriting there in the upper left-hand corner. And just so that we're straight on this, I do want to mention, what she's trying to tell you there is that I was 7 years old when I drew it, not that I looked like that at age 7. I'm pretty sure I couldn't grow a decent beard until I was, I don't know, maybe 9 or 10, something like that. But I did want to become an artist at a very, very early age. And I was lucky that my parents were very encouraging about that, in spite of the fact that neither of them were professional artists. Or, come to think of it, maybe it was because they weren't professional artists. But in any case, I was very lucky, and I had a wonderful childhood, and they did indulge my artistic tendencies. So eventually, I went off to art school. And I decided to study fine art. I took the academic courses, the drawing from the model and things like that. And so I was doing things like this. I would be in studio. This was a very rigorous kind of course, very academic. I did not study any commercial art or any design, which is kind of ironic in light of everything that happened since then. So I was continuing to do all of this kind of academic work, and I was beginning to develop an emphasis in drawing and printmaking and painting. So this was definitely big A artist kind of thing. This was where I was headed at this point. After a certain point, I began to develop a body of more abstract work and gradually matured into a bona fide, wild-haired, bohemian, big A artist. My parents continued to be very encouraging, although I think they worried about my ability to support myself, as any good parent would. I remember my father, who was a very pragmatic, business-like guy, would say to me, you know, all this is really neat, and it's great, but I can't see any practical application. He would shake his head, and he would say to me, son, you know, the thing is, you can't eat art. And this weighed on me very heavily as time went on. And I got a little older, I got out of art school, and I went on to my life. And I supported myself through a series of odd jobs, some a lot odder than others. And I have a sister who at that time lived here in Kansas City. And she suggested that I apply to Hallmark cards. And I thought, well, that's a great idea. I'll try that. And so I submitted a portfolio, and it was rejected. And undeterred, I decided, well, I'll submit another portfolio. And another, and another, and another. Until in the end, I think I reapplied for a job at Hallmark, I think something like 6 or 8 times. Ultimately, I believe I was hired because it was the only way they could think of to make me go away. But I was in. And I felt really great about that. And my parents did too. They could stop worrying because there are very few things in the eyes of non-artists that are quite as stable and bona fide as working for Hallmark cards. At Hallmark, I worked at a variety of jobs before settling into a position as an illustrator. And luckily, I was able to bring some of my skills that I had developed as a printmaker to bear. as in this little color etching that I did. I had a great honor to have this piece chosen for Donald Hall's personal greeting card that he was going to use for the year 1987. And so on that year, when my birthday rolled around, I found one of these in my mailbox. And here's what the inside looked like. This was incredibly gratifying for me, as you might imagine, and is a perfect example of the kind of personal touch that made Hallmark such a great place to work for. It was also at Hallmark that I began to really learn how to be a professional creative person. That is to say, to work in a team and to brainstorm and to apply ideas to product and things like this. Because after all, I mean, Hallmark was a fantastic place. I was surrounded by brilliant, talented, creative people who were very, very generous with their time. And I tried to soak up as much of that as I possibly could. So it was during this period of time that I discovered that I had a curiosity for humorous illustration and cartooning that I probably never would have been able to pursue otherwise. It's a funny thing, but to me, I don't actually see a lot of difference between what it takes to compose a painting and what it takes to make something like this, even though the outcomes are really very different. But to my thinking, good composition is good composition. You know, whether you're trying to support a joke or whether it's some sort of big A artist painting. I don't really see that there should be a hierarchy of these things. Whether it's a cartoon or a beer label or a painting or some sort of performance art piece, I like to see that sort of get all mashed together. In all, I stayed with Hallmark for 11 years. It was a really wonderful experience. 6 of those years, the last 6 were spent in what was then a very new, tiny little division called Shoebox. And it was during this time that I met one of the very interesting and talented and creative people there that John alluded to. Her name was Ann Bloomer. And she introduced me to her then boyfriend, who turned out to be a very interesting guy in his own right, and his name was John McDonald. I believe you met him. Not only did we have in common the fact that we'd both gone to Big A art school and studied painting and printmaking, but we did homebrew beer together. And without getting into a lot of specifics, I think I can tell you that from the outset it was pretty obvious that one of us had much more of a knack for brewing than the other one did. I think I'll just let it go at that. John did get serious about turning pro as a brewer somewhere in the mid-'80s, and in November of 1989, Boulevard Brewing Company was born. It was a struggle, as John alluded to, and it was after about a year of hard work that he did approach me. I remember at the time since I was already friends with John, I felt kind of guilty about taking money for those first designs. I was sort of the inverse of those agencies that he had gone to, and I felt really kind of bound up about it. And you know, I kind of went into a long spiel about this, which he very nicely allowed me to finish before telling me that he didn't have any money to pay me anyway. So. This is actually the first label that John and I designed, along with help from Mary Harrison and a lot of other people that were involved in the little fledgling brewery at the time. And it's kind of interesting. I wonder if there could be a show of hands here. Is there anybody, how many people here remember this label? And I should caution you before you raise your hands because you're going to tell something about yourselves. Because we designed this 23 years ago, okay? Kind of scary, but it seems like it was just last week. It's amazing. And it really kind of set the tone, to tell you the truth, for everything that's come ever since. In as much as it was a really open kind of a design process. Everybody had input. It was a real communal kind of thing. And the whole idea was that the aspirations of this little tiny company should somehow or other find some kind of visual expression here in this label. So it was a lot of fun. Oh, I should go back and say, we had originally planned for Pale Ale to be our flagship brand for Boulevard, which is why the logo is sort of front and center there. But it didn't actually turn out that way. Wheat beer was introduced shortly after then. You might notice here there's an absence of that key word unfiltered. It's because it wasn't unfiltered yet. That didn't happen for several years. And it really kind of languished as a brand until it became unfiltered wheat beer, became a phenomenon, became our de facto flagship brand, and eventually reached, what, I think almost 70% of our total volume. I remember that one of the early concepts that we had for this label featured some prize fighters on the label. And I remember suggesting that somehow a dog might seem kind of friendlier. I don't know why I thought that, but I think what I had in mind was an old photo that I'd seen of Winston Churchill. Irish Ale looked a lot different at first, changed quite a lot later on. So through these intervening years, right in here, 1990 and going forward, Boulevard kept me busy with quite a few freelance projects, these labels and some POS and some advertisement. And of course, keep in mind, I still had my day job at Hallmark until in 1995, when John made the very bold move of offering me a full-time position with Boulevard Brewing Company. Now, it's really hard for me to impress upon you just how much nerve it must have taken for him to think that it was a good idea to hire a full-time artist for a struggling small brewery that made what, on the order of something like 50,000 barrels annually or something, I don't know. But somehow or other, I think he believed that there was value in this, which is amazing. And I've spent the intervening 18 years trying to prove that he was right. So, one of the first things that we did after I joined, I jumped ship. I left Hallmark. I left the security of Hallmark, and I cast my lot in with a merry band of crazy people starting a brewery. Imagine what my parents must have thought. But the funny thing is, this is when the golden Zen-like wisdom of my father's words came back to me. He was so right. You can't eat art. You're supposed to drink it. It's so simple and yet so profound. The path forward in my life was laid out before me, and I haven't looked back. Here's another look at kind of the transition that we went through in updating Pale Ale. Now, by the way, let me back up for a second real quick. This stuff looks very crude to me now in light of everything that came out later. It's important to bear in mind this was all pre-digital. There's no computers involved. Al Gore hadn't invented the internet yet. This was all paced up and camera-ready stuff. Those of you, and I know there are some Hallmarkers in here. There are artists here. You know, this is way back there. Ruby, yeah, yes. So now we're beginning to use digital design, and this opened up a whole lot of different possibilities for us. So you can kind of see, you know, we were really sort of trying to bring this thing uptown. We've got a neck label now, and we're doing all these other neat things to it. The boxes also came along. We've always been very, very fond of these quirky little closed boxes that we've had since the very beginning. And we've gone through a huge number of changes on these things. Now, wheat beer has its unfiltered moniker. Looks a little bit more familiar to those of us. Bully Porter as well. Looks more like, good, thank you. A little bit better likeness. Irish Ale. I wonder how many people here are aware of the fact that the federal government has an agency called the Tax and Trade Bureau that has authority over the labeling of all alcoholic beverages in the United States. They required us to add the words brewed and bottled in Kansas City, Missouri to this label, just so that consumers would not be confused and think that this ale might have come from Ireland. Here's one that might not be so familiar to some of us here. We have had to bid fond farewell over the years to a few brands, such as Tenpenny, So Long, Dry Stout, Auf Wiedersehen, Lunar Ale. But hello to a few other new beers from time to time along the years. Boss Tom's Golden Bock pays tribute to the infamous Boss Tom Pendergast and the rival rabbit and goat factions of the machine politics back in the 30s when Kansas City was known as Paris on the Plains. A Single-Wide is part of a continuum of sort of trailer park themed India Pale Ales that we've been developing. It began with Double-Wide IPA, which is a smokestack beer. You'll see that in a minute. And it now includes a brand new beer. Pop-Up IPA is what we call a session beer, which is kind of a new and interesting trend in craft brewing right now. Very, very interesting, complex, full-flavored beers that have a little less alcohol. And it's a really interesting trend right now. This is just brand new out right now. You can find this here in Kansas City. So around 2006, we began a new series of beers called the Smokestack series. And these are very big and challenging, interesting beers, the subsequent success of which has really changed the course of our company. The branding for these beers has been a fantastic opportunity to deepen our opportunities for storytelling, which we've really found to be a major attribute for branding our beers. The more depth of storytelling that we can find for a brand, and if it's honest, if we can find a way to tell an honest story and allow consumers to engage with that, we find that they're able to make much more of a deeper commitment to us as a brand. In this case, the sixth glass was based on a story by Hans Christian Andersen that somebody had given John some years before. And in it, there's a village watchman who describes to the narrator what he has seen over the New Year's celebrations. It becomes sort of a cautionary tale about drinking. The first glass is beneficial, even healthful. The second glass is harmless. It just contains a harmless inebriation, and so on, until things begin to turn a little bit more sinister. In the sixth glass, we meet the devil himself, who's described as a charming and well-dressed little gentleman. He even brings a lamp to light your way. Not to your home, however, to his. Here's our first trailer park beer. It's a Double-Wide IPA. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I should say that this label was based on a painting by the terrific Kansas City artist Scott Gober. But Scotty borrowed some elements from an illustration that I had made of the brewery building, the pillars around our tasting room door, and of course the smokestack, and he sort of meshed them together with an illustration of a travel trailer. So I guess you could kind of say that I just borrowed them back. Long Strange Triple. Triple is a style of beer that originates from the Abbey breweries of Belgium. And we thought that by punning on the name Triple and Trip, and to be able to say what a long, strange trip it had been for us, and still is, that we might get a chance to sort of channel all that great poster art from The Summer of Love and The Grateful Dead and Haight-Ashbury. And then we really hit the trifecta when we realized that we could put a portrait of my very good friend and our longest tenured employee, Trip Hogue. And believe me, the beer's a trip too. This is a label that I'm personally very fond of. I think because of its simplicity, because of the interplay of positive and negative space. I should say that this beer is kind of tentatively in semi-retirement at the moment. But I think if we all wish really, really hard and write letters to the brewery, it might come back. Tank 7. Tank 7 was an object lesson for me in leaving well enough alone. The fact is, this beer named itself. That is to say, the brewers really named this. It was named for a fermentation vessel, which are all numbered in the brewery. And this was a vessel that they weren't particularly fond of, by the way. But the beer was so dang good that it just became shorthand for the name for the beer. And it stuck. It stuck so solidly that we couldn't come up with a better name. This was the best name. And in fact, the whole story behind it was kind of spooky. It was as if fate really played a hand in the development of the whole beer. So I was pretty reluctant to get too heavy-handed about this. So what I decided to do was just to try and nudge the typeface a little bit. So I looked for something, thinking about fate and spookiness and stuff like that. And I found the typeface from a Ouija board. You know? Just to see if I could find a way to work myself into your subconscious. I understand that if you're planning a seance, this is definitely the beer you should bring. Now, there's an old English folk song that goes, "There were three men come out of the east, their fortunes for to try, and these three men made a solemn vow, John Barleycorn must die." It's an allegory of the harvest, where the barley plant in the person of poor John Barleycorn is planted, he's raised up, he's cut down, he's slaughtered, he's thrashed, and finally he's ground between two stones. In the end, however, he triumphs as beer and whiskey. So in this case, barley, the stand-in for barley, is his cousin wheat. Of course, I think we know from the picture there how the dance is going to end. But don't worry, she's alive and well in the glass. This was just really much more of a strictly graphic design. Again, the interplay of positive and negative space, that's something that I really find very potent. Of course, I also was really interested in how the bowl of the glass could stand in for the U in the word truth, and how the stem of the glass could bisect the O of stout. I was also thinking, I don't know how many of you here know Saul Bass, the wonderful designer who did a lot of wonderful film label work. And I'm a big fan of his, and I think there was a little bit of influence from him in this as well. Now, here's one some of you may already know about. Just to anticipate the question, no, I do not know whether we're going to bring it out again next year. The answer to that question is above my pay grade, okay? The lettering I drizzled out on a glass slab with ink and a stick, Jackson Pollock style. And then I scanned it into a computer and added the color and the shading and the reflections. I didn't get it right the first time. We did coffee ale because we didn't learn the lesson from chocolate ale. No, that's not true. That's not true at all. No, these collaborations are really fascinating, and they've been a great opportunity for me to interact with people like the Roastery and Christopher Elbow, and these are fantastic people doing wonderful things with non-beer products, but other really interesting niche food products, and it's the creative exchange is just fantastic. From time to time, as a part of the Smokestack series, we do some collaborative work. And our first collaboration was so popular that we decided to bring it back. Thus, Reverb. It brings back the original style. I had a great lot of fun with this label. To begin with, the whole idea of an Imperial Pilsner is kind of crazy to start with. Pilsner is a very refined and attenuated style. And to make it into an Imperial Pilsner is literally to sort of amp it up into a great big alcoholic beer. So basically, if you look very closely, all of the knobs on the amplifier go to 11. And I guess I don't have to explain that, if you've seen the film, This is Spinal Tap, you know why. And if you don't, go see that film. Love Child is another one of these brewer-named things, brilliant thing. You know, brewers are artists too. And like artists, they have to keep their minds open to fortuitous accidents. And especially when we are brewing things like this, these beers that sort of have wild yeast and they have these funky, sour flavors to them. So Love Child has been a really exciting and continues to be an unfolding, exciting bunch of beers that are happening. To leave Smokestack for a second, a new series of beers that we are just now creating is called Tasting Room. And here we're beginning to open the process up to the public a little bit more. These are beers that are available only in the Tasting Room and in our new sample 12-pack. They're not available anywhere else. And these are kind of test beers. And we are opening the door, if you will, to comments from everybody. You can go online, you can tell us what you think about the beer. You can tell us if you think we should make this beer a part of our regular lineup. So this is a whole new way to kind of like open the process up to everybody else, which is really kind of fun. Okay, so at this point, I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk more strictly about one single brand and tell you sort of how we built that up. But before I do that, I want to introduce some people to you. Time was a long time ago. I was kind of a lonely guy there at Boulevard. I was the whole department, if you will. But now I'm very, very lucky to work with a fantastic group of really talented and interesting people. And we are the marketing team now. And I'd like you to get to know them. We're headed up by Jeremy Raganese, our director of marketing, who's unfortunately unable to make it here tonight. He is also accompanied at the very important meeting that he's at tonight by Blair Finn, our sales and marketing coordinator. However, tonight we do have with us Julie Weeks. Please stand up, Julie. Julie is our marketing communications manager. She's joined here by Andy Jenkins, our branded content producer. As well as Sarah Carlew, our events and community relations manager. Jeremy Danner, who is first and foremost a brewer, but also in our team wears the cap for craft marketing specialist. Brian Fisher, digital media producer. Last but not least, Joel Herman, graphic designer. This is the team that is taking the Boulevard brand to the next level, and I think they deserve a very big round of applause. Okay, so to 80 Acre. It starts with the beer. It always starts with the beer. The brewers go through a series of test batches. They refine that, and they reach a point where there is a beer that is ready to be brought to market. And then the branding process begins. It shouldn't be the other way around. The beer must be first both chronologically and in priority. And so it is for us, definitely. So once the beer is established, the next step is usually finding a name. Now, a rose by any other name may smell as sweet, but if you're in the business of selling roses, it's pretty important what you call it, especially if you have a lot of other people selling roses in the marketplace, which we certainly do in our little rose selling business that we're in right now. Great product names don't just fall out of the sky. There's a method to creating them, and there's a rationale behind it. We begin by soliciting names from virtually everybody in the brewery. Everybody and their family, everybody and their friends. And we start, in this case, we began with a list of literally hundreds of names, which might surprise you. Some of them good, some of them not so good. But we use a series of tests to try and help us determine what might be a better name for a particular beer. And one of these is a term something we term callability. This is basically the idea that a beer can be easily pronounced, easily ordered in a noisy bar setting. And that name would be easily legible in that same setting. So this is kind of a thing that you need to think about. Of course, things like alliteration and assonance, the musicality of the name, these are very important. And there's another term that we call stickiness, which is really kind of hard to define. But there are some things that simply lodge in our memories a little bit more solidly than others. And we try to pay attention to that, too. So, as we tried to grapple with this huge list of hundreds of names, we began to take a survey of all the sort of vaguely similar kinds of products that were already out in the marketplace to see what other breweries called their beers that were sort of like this, and how that might relate to some of the beers that or some of the names, rather, that we were considering. And we found that it sort of divided itself out into three basic categories. The first one we termed references to ingredients, process, or flavor attributes. This is pretty straightforward stuff where, and these are all, by the way, in this first list here at the top, these are all brands that exist out there. Some of these are not available in our market, but all of them mention something that directly relates to the taste experience or to the ingredients or something like that. And in the parenthesis at the bottom are some of the leading contenders that we had on our list that sort of fell into that category for us. The second group we termed references that are more purely evocative. This is just the kind of the crazy off-the-wall names. Some of these are familiar to you. Some of them might not be. And then at the end, at the bottom there, are some of the ones that we thought fit well into this category. My personal favorite from this is Three-Headed Monkey Circus, if only because that is so much what the process resembles itself. The last category was one that really turned out to be more potent for us, more critical for us, particularly for this beer. Regional references. And it's interesting to note that for craft brewers, regional references really do have a lot of weight. I think it's because most of us, even if we are nationally distributed, we have very strong regional bases. And that's certainly true for Boulevard Brewing Company. Another interesting thing I think about the regional references is that most of them need to be kind of decoded. Two-Hearted Ale, most of us are not going to understand. It refers to a river up in Michigan where Bells is located that's a popular trout fishing destination. It was actually made famous by a short story by Ernest Hemingway. 312 happens to be the area code for Chicago, where Goose Island is located. So you kind of have to live there to get it, which, come to think of it, is a nice metaphor for Kansas City itself. So you'll see down here that we had a number of names that were really kind of working strongly for us. And one of them is the one that ultimately got the brass ring there, 80 Acre. The next step after that is to develop what we call a brand board. And this is a chance for us to kind of like flesh that name out, to sort of begin to create some of the intellectual underpinnings for the brand. It gives us a chance to sort of try on some stylistic clothes, if you will, to see how that will work. It's important to create a label that is attractive, but you've got to do more than just get from the shelf to the shopping cart. You have to find a way to map back to a memory, a story, to the brewery itself, to some sort of emotional feeling about the region or something, so that people will be able to find their way back to the brand later on, particularly in this new environment that we find ourselves in craft brewing. There are literally dozens of new breweries opening every month, and they're introducing hundreds of new brands every week. Buckaroo was another example, doing kind of something similar to what Bebop was doing. Here we were obviously making some kind of reference to the jazz heritage of Kansas City, and our favorite son, Charlie Parker, he was a prime exponent, of course, of the bebop style. Buckaroo sort of does the same thing. It reaches a little bit further back into the Wild West era, or at least the romanticized aspect of the Wild West era. I think it's interesting to point out here, too, that both bebop and buckaroo, with those strong consonant sounds to them, have that kind of callability aspect to them. So I thought that both of these were pretty strong contenders at one point. You remember there was a name back there called Wild Hare? We were working really hard on that for a while, and we were trying to tie that to the hoppy aspect of the beer. And so for a while I was drawing a lot of funny pictures of rabbits. honest, none of these are from Hallmark. This was all for this label, as well as doing some pictures of more conventional ingredient kind of stuff. It was an idea to sort of try on the clothing of a possible brand. Go through dozens of these before we come down to any kind of solid thing. A more literal reference to the sort of illustration here. At some point or another, 80 acre became a more prominent idea for us. This was actually proposed by one of our salesmen. When he was a kid, he'd worked in his uncle's farm during the summer. And he had noticed that almost all the fields were 80 acres in size. And he was curious, why is that? So we started doing some research. And it turns out that the Homestead Act from back in the 1860s, which is how most of the Great Plains got settled, was something that the Congress passed. Abraham Lincoln signed the bill. And it made public lands available to settlers for a nominal fee, almost free, really. And it was an idea that they wanted to settle the Great Plains and to convert them to farmland. So this was how a lot of wheat farming and a lot of grain farming in the Great Plains got started in the first place. The parcels that the Homestead Act made available were all 160-acre sections. So when you divide that in half, you get an 80-acre farm. Also, some of you may be familiar with the term back 40. It was simply the furthest end of an 80-acre parcel. So we thought with that kind of tie to history, wheat farming in the Midwest, and the agrarian culture, along with the kind of almost rhyming assonance of 80 acre, we might have something. We didn't have an image, though, that really tied sufficiently to us. Here I was trying for a more literal kind of an idea, maybe trying to make it look more like a fruit crate label or something like that. This is a more graphic approach. Again, this wasn't quite doing it for us yet. And yeah, we went here too. You know, they say some ideas are keepers and some of them you just have to cut up and use as bait for other ideas. At some point or another, there was a red tractor that kind of rolled slowly into our subconscious and it started to make waves. We started to say, okay, now I think we've got something that people will really be able to latch on to. So at this point, it was just a job of refining it, getting it down to a finished state. So the illustration for the tractor is beginning to take shape here. And I'm beginning to sort of like move the furniture around a little bit. At this stage, once things become kind of tightened up like this, little details like, you know, how a part of the illustration occludes a part of the type or something like that become very important, and you start to get very, very fussy. And this went back and forth for quite some time. There were two things that were really bothering me at this point. The title treatment was one of them, and the farmer was the other. And I couldn't quite figure out what it was about either of those two that wasn't quite ringing for me yet. So as far as the title went, I went back to my research for tractors, and I found this. It was right under my nose. Yes, it's a Farmall tractor. And I looked at that nameplate that was on the front of the tractor, and I thought, well, there I think I have the solution for my title. So there's the finished label. This is what came out. Well, you notice there's something happened to the farmer. He took a powder. I got to thinking about why I was so upset about the farmer, and I realized that he shouldn't be there. If you put the farmer on the tractor, it's his tractor. If you take it away, it might be yours. You could go sit in that tractor. You could drive it around if you want. It's a much more attractive idea. So there it is. By the way, I do occasionally get to do a greeting card. Every year, John McDonald sends out birthday greetings to all the employees at Boulevard. And it seems like it'd be a shame to make him go out and buy those cards. He had found this quote someplace and really liked it. So I made it into a card. Well, last week I had a birthday. And I got this in the mail. And here's what it said on the inside. Now, I don't want to take anything away from Donald Hall, But I'll have to say, this really is pretty damn special. So with that, we're done. We can turn the lights up. And I hope to take some questions. Please don't be shy. I know they have these mics set up here, and that's great. You can come up to the mics if you want, or you can just yell at me. I don't care. How do we do for time? Good? Okay. Yes, please.
Hey, it was a great presentation. I don't drink beer, but
Go back to your seat. No, I'm sorry. No.
my brother does, and he's coming over the Labor Day weekend, and I was wondering about the tours that you guys give, and perhaps, you know, what it is that you show, and so if you have anything that, you know, that we could see a part of the factory or anything, could you just tell me how that works out?
We sure do. Just we have lots of tours, and basically I think all you need to do is show up.
During Labor Day weekend?
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm going to have to refer you to the website on that one. Okay. It used to be that you had to reserve a spot. That has changed, I believe, right? And I think it's a little bit easier to get in because we have more tours now. It is a darn shame that we sometimes have to turn people away on tours, but we try to get as many people as we can, for sure. We want you to come and have a nice tour experience.
Thank you so kindly.
You bet.
First, I want to say sorry for always tearing the labels off. I can't help it. I love the labels, but I tear them off. And please let there be a bebop. Jim Flora, that would be beautiful.
Okay,
Even
sure.
an 816.
Maybe, oh, okay, 816 bebop.
Yeah, 816 bebop. I'd love it.
Thank you. Thanks very much. We'll try.
I just had a quick question about what kind of studies you do for a beer that you're going to run short term and not necessarily a new addition to an annual line, and kind of how you kind of make it a limited edition rather than a production label.
That's almost a question that I think probably better defer to a brewer, but I think that the short answer is it's really determined by the beer itself. There are things that we can ramp up into large production, and there are some beers that are really only possible to make in very small batches. And so it isn't marketing. It's just sort of like I alluded to earlier. It's not a marketing decision that makes a beer a limited edition beer. It's the ability to make a large quantity of it more.
It was kind of like with the Smokestack series, it seems like more rules are broken and you kind of have a little bit more leeway and or almost fun with the label designs. Not that there isn't a lot of work that goes into the production labels and that kind of thing of wheat and pale ale and 80 acre, but you know, is there kind of more of a collaborative, kind of more like just kind of go on your own kind of a aspect for the Smokestack?
It is. Thank you for saying so. That's true. It's a looser aesthetic for, I'm not even sure how I could define that, but it is a looser aesthetic for smokestack beers than it is for what we term our heritage beers, our regular mainline beers. I don't know why it is. We just tend to be a little bit more grown-ups when we deal with heritage beers, and then we just let our ids kind of run wild with the smokestack. It's good to have both.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
I was going to ask, I know among brewers of a lot of different craft breweries, there's not necessarily a sense of, competition. There's more of a sense of camaraderie of, being in it together.
Yes, still, thank goodness. No.
Do you find the same among the people who design the labels, that you find that same sort of interaction? Do you interact with the designers from other breweries in the same fashion, do you feel?
I think we would be if we had any idea who each other were. The funny thing is that most of us labor in the background, and rightfully so. I think all of us, with the exception of tonight, thank goodness, and thank you all, most of us are happy to be backstage. We're not front of the house, we're back of the house. The beer is in front, and we just, we're part of the production company. So I don't know any other label designers, to tell you the truth. I'd like to meet them if you know any. Send them my way.
I'm curious to know, how does the type of beer and the flavor of the beer affect your design, if it does at all?
Oh, it does tremendously. In fact, I don't think I can imagine designing a beer label without having tasted the beer first. It's funny, somebody was talking to me not long ago and said, is good design a universal? Would you be able to work in an agency where you would, do one product one day and another product the other day? And, it's just like, and I thought about, all the different products you might work on. I thought, well, you'd have to be very flexible. You might have to design a packaging for feminine products. And I thought to myself, well, I never design a beer label without tasting the beer first. This could be really problematic for me, So, I mean, yeah, it definitely needs to flow through to the design, and then it's part of the culture too. It's no secret, we drink beer every day there. We have to. And you have to really be part of that culture. You have to really be in tune and on top of it. Otherwise, you're not doing your duty, I don't think.
Thanks.
Sure.
I was just wondering how long the whole design process usually takes.
A good question. Anywhere from weeks to days, depending on how soon they need the label. It's funny, it's kind of an inverse. I think a painter was once asked, how do you know when a painting's finished? When it's time to drink beer. It's like, well, how do you know when the label is done? Well, when my time's up, Sometimes mistakes happen, and you have to, you just don't have the time that you'd like to do a whole lot of things, and so we just work faster.
How long did you do for pop-up IPA? Wasn't that one of the fastest?
That was about 3 days. Yeah. That's crazy.
Versus like single-wide, to give an example.
Yeah, single-wide, really, well, 80 Acre, for example, was a year almost. I mean, really, when you take into consideration all the trouble that we had with the name, you're right. 80 Acre probably stretched on for more than a year. And Pop-Up, basically, we popped it out in about three days. I hope that you can't really see a real big difference there. But maybe, I don't know.
Are there prints available of your label designs for purchase anywhere?
Yes and no. There are labels. You can go to the brewery and you can get unused, flat labels themselves. We've blown up labels and offered them as posters occasionally in the past. They did so. I'll tell you what, it really has kind of become an interesting thing. We've worked with a local group called Hammer Press, Brady Vest, wonderful, fantastic letterpress artist, and he has taken a lot of the design elements of the labels and then made them into these wonderful posters that are an entirely other thing. He's put a lot of his own vision into that, and I definitely recommend coming down to look at those. And we hope to do more of those soon, too.
The metal things.
The metal things, yes, thank you, Adam. We have made some embossed metal signs that are adapted from labels as well. Yeah. Good. Come on down to the brewery, see the gift shop, leave your wallet.
You've been here a while. Oh. Maybe you answered this with the time frame question, but with the IPA label continuum, double wide and single wide seem to be more of a vintage inspired feel, and then you get to pop up and it's sort of cartoony.
I only had 3 days, okay?
I was going to say, what was the impetus behind that, going more cartoony?
The idea was to really kind of, I was hoping to tie those together a little bit better than that. The vintage aspect of it is interesting because I don't want us to really be like, the nostalgia look brewery, but somehow or other there's something potent that I can't quite get away from in terms of, if it's going to be a trailer, for example, it shouldn't be a brand new one. And I can't explain exactly why that should be, but I think it has a lot to do with the fact that Boulevard is very tradition-based at the same time as being a very forward-looking, brewery itself. And so there's always got to be a little bit of an element of nostalgia there without just, hitting it over your head with a hammer, I hope. Anyway.
I have one more, sorry.
Sure.
Was there ever a favorite design that you never got to use?
No. No. And you know what? That's a really interesting point that I never really thought about. Because basically, I have been incredibly fortunate. Not that they've let me do everything I wanted to do, but everything has found a way to sort of work itself out in a beautiful way that has allowed me a tremendous amount of free expression in this job. So that's an extremely good question. Thank you.
My question is about the boxes. You talked early on about the quirky boxes of Boulevard.
Yeah.
Big fan of those. But you turn those boxes upside down, and there's almost always a funny little label, little picture of a guy. Like on the sample packs, you turn it over, and there's a guy scratching his head, and it says decisions, decisions, decisions.
Yep.
They're classic. Are those yours?
Yep.
Are they? Okay.
Yeah. Maybe this is something I learned from Hallmark. It's like that same sort of thing. It's just like always looking for some sort of hidden way to delight you, if I can, you know, to have some little extra thing that you might not see on the first glance, but you might see later on, and it's just a way for us to say, hey, hi, thanks, you know?
The first question's easy. Where'd you go to art school?
Oh, I went to what was then SMSU, which is now Missouri State, down in my hometown of Springfield, Missouri. Julie, come on, get up.
You must like cashew chicken then.
Of course.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Home of cashew chicken. Well, we could get into a whole discussion on this. Never mind, you people who don't know.
Second question is, if you work with Hammer Press, how about working with Mike Sims at Lawrence Lithography and doing a lithograph?
Okay. Sure.
Could be a nice combination.
It could. It could. Have him call me.
I think you have to call him first.
Really? Okay.
He's a good guy.
All right. But he's shy, apparently.
Yes.
Okay, good. I'll look him up.
Hello. So this is obviously a wildly competitive market. You walk into the liquor store and there are rows and rows of beer. And a lot of times you're very much judged. It's like judging a book by its cover. I'm going to pick a beer based on label alone. What role does Boulevard play from a marketing perspective in influencing or maybe vetoing your work? And you touched on this because you did talk about how you haven't had a design that you loved that you didn't get to use.
Mm-hmm.
But at what point do they step in and say, that's not what we're looking for?
At almost every point. It is, John said it one way, you know, that everybody comes up and says, I don't like this part of this or that. Another way to say the same thing is that this is not my voice. This is Boulevard's voice speaking through me. And so it's not, you know, if it were my voice, it would be one thing. But it's definitely a moving target at all times, and it needs to be the voice of, the collective voice of the brewery going forward. So that's really the influence that you're talking about there, is that it has to be that kind of collective kind of thing. And one other point that I think you alluded to, it's a very competitive market, but it's really a crowded market. It isn't so much competitive, but it's extremely crowded, and it isn't just at that retail environment. Social media is a hugely important piece of how craft brewing works, because everybody who's really intimately involved in it, and the most important kind of like key influencers of craft brewing are very, very much involved in the social media realm of things. And so there's a tremendous amount of action that happens in that environment for us. So it isn't all just about that encounter at the beer cooler and go, oh my God, what am I going to buy here? You know, it's bigger than that. Did that answer your question? I think it was kind of like
very
free-flowing
well.
there for a second
Do
there.
I have a quick follow-up? Is
Sure.
there another label that you like? Is there another beer that you feel is doing really good work?
All of them. I do. I really, there are so many good labels. I named just a few. Odell's out in Colorado Springs has a wonderful whole group, and all of their labels look so good together. It's a really kind of a nice thing. Schmaltz Brewing Company of all things. The people who make Hebrew, you ever seen that? They have a Coney Island series, nutty stuff, really fun, really wonderful. Gosh, I love German beer labels because they're so different from anything that we do here. I love all stuff.
Thank you.
Everything I see.
And I really appreciated the walkthrough on the 80 acre. That was awesome.
Thank you.
So,
I'm so glad. Thank you.
Thank you. I was wondering about a walkthrough too. Would you be able to take us through a walkthrough a little bit about changing label design, the pale ale in a minor way and the Pilsner in a pretty major way?
Sure. Depending upon time, and I would defer to Henry here. I think we kind of covered a little bit of what we did with pale ale. Pilsner was an interesting opportunity for us to bring this brand more into the family, if you will. Take it out of the long neck, bring it into this smaller bottle that's part of all the rest of our beers. And really the key, I think, for me in terms of the redesign was when we made the decision to tie it to giving back 10% of the profits to local Kansas City charities. Then I really... It's true because, branding isn't just about, color and drawing and name and things like that. It's about a whole, I hate to use the word synergy, but, it's a whole group of things that work together. And somehow or other, when that element was brought into place, it's like the visual part suddenly clicked for me. And I knew why KC Pils was a much better new name than Boulevard Pilsner was before. And I could really get behind that. I knew where we were, and I knew where it had to go. So, it's kind of an emotional thing. And then from there, it just became graphics. I knew that I needed to try and find some sort of like semi-Art Deco looking kinds of letter forms. In other words, to sort of, again, make that kind of reference back to the heyday of Kansas City, which we still sort of either suffer or benefit from a lot of the reflected glow from that time when we were Paris on the Plains. And so I tried to sort of make a little bit of passing reference to that. Does that help? I don't want to go.
Yeah.
I don't want to take up the rest of the evening. We could go crazy here, but I would need more beer.
Thanks.
Last question.
Okay.
Boulevard just put out a beer in collaboration with Sierra Nevada.
Yes, we did.
How did that process work in terms of designing the label? Did you work with them? Did many conference calls, or how did it work that that label was designed? And I guess next year the beer is going to be produced in Kansas City. Will it be a new label that you have to make all over again?
Okay, in order. I punted, basically. That label was not designed by me. He's talking, by the way, about Terra Incognita.
Yes, I'm sorry, I forgot.
No, that's all right. The collaboration that we did with Sierra Nevada. And that label was designed by Brady Vest and his folks down there at Hammer Press. So the initial release of that was a very, very limited release that was done just for a special event up in Washington, D.C. called Savor. And those were actually letterpress labels that we hand applied very laboriously for that special event. But then we decided to then turn around and bring it back into the line. When we did so, we, of course, made it a mass-produced label. It wasn't, a letterpress print anymore. But all we did was simply make it as close to that original as we possibly could. We have released it here in Kansas City now, and it is about to be released. Do I have this correct? It is now released out in California by Sierra Nevada as well. So that joint release is now complete.
So next year, what will happen? Will it be a new label, a new?
Don't know.
Sierra Nevada produces it next year.
Okay, Sierra Nevada produces it next year. Okay. Let's just talk to her. She knows.
Okay, this is the last question.
Okay.
Last question.
Last one.
May I offer a suggestion for a beer name associated with Western Missouri? How about Bushwhacker beer?
Oh, well, of course. That makes a great deal of sense. Okay. Thank you very much.
Payton, thank you very, very much. This was even better than I anticipated. We don't have any books to sign, but if you kept your bottle, Payton will sign the label.
Yes, I will.
Okay, well, we'll see you next time. Drink
Cheers.
up.
Thank you so much.
Oh, man, you were fantastic.
You guys are. This is terrific. This is great.